Right now, an internal directive from the highest levels of the Pentagon is sitting on the desks of defense industry executives across the country. It was issued over the weekend by Deputy Defense Secretary Steve Feinberg, and its contents reveal a military infrastructure on the brink of a profound crisis. The memo issues a strict 21-day deadline for American defense manufacturers to figure out a way to rapidly escalate the production of our most advanced weapons. Specifically, the Pentagon is demanding an immediate acceleration in the manufacturing of high-end air defense interceptors and long-range missiles. But there is a massive documented contradiction at the center of this emergency order. These precision weapons, which serve as the backbone of our defensive posture in the Middle East, simply cannot be mass produced in a matter of weeks. They take anywhere from 1 to 5 years to complete. The math does not add up, and the consequences of this shortfall are no longer hypothetical. Over the last 5.5 months, our forces have been burning through munitions at a rate that the industrial base cannot sustain, forcing United States commanders in the region to make agonizing decisions. They are actively rationing the missiles that protect American troops. And while this logistical nightmare unfolds behind closed doors, the adversary watching closest has suddenly changed the terms of engagement, because they know exactly how vulnerable our military has become. To understand how dangerous this situation has become, we have to look past the political rhetoric and examine the actual numbers compiled by nonpartisan researchers. According to deep analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, right here in Washington, the United States has already burned through anywhere from 40 to 70% of our stockpiles for advanced interceptors. We are talking about critical systems like the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, and Patriot missile batteries. These are not basic artillery rounds. These are highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar systems designed to shoot down incoming ballistic missiles in the upper atmosphere. Losing up to 70% of that stockpile alters the entire balance of power in the region. Yet, instead of addressing this terrifying vulnerability, the political response has focused heavily on optics. The administration has repeatedly tried to deny that these stockpiles are depleted. Instead of acknowledging the manufacturing crisis, the president has taken to social media to threaten the individuals leaking the reality of these depleted stockpiles to the press, vowing to go after them and calling them treasonous. But keeping quiet about an empty magazine does not magically refill it, and threatening whistleblowers does not restart assembly lines. If you believe that understanding the reality of our national security requires looking past political talking points and examining the hard evidence, please subscribe to this channel so we can continue bringing you these independent investigations. The fundamental flaw in the Pentagon's 21-day demand is that it treats precision aerospace engineering like a commercial automotive assembly line. You cannot just command a factory to increase output when the supply chain for these weapons is incredibly complex and deeply fragile. We are dealing with precision components that require highly specialized materials. Each interceptor relies on intricately machined rocket motors. They require advanced GPS guidance systems. They depend on thermal sensors and microelectronics that take months to source, test, and integrate into a functioning weapon. Building a Patriot missile or a THAAD interceptor requires an industrial base that was essentially downsized decades ago and has never been fully rebuilt for this kind of sustained high-intensity conflict. Despite public claims that new plants are currently being built to handle this demand, defense industry experts and retired military leaders clearly state that this is simply not true. There are no new plants suddenly going up overnight. You cannot just increase a production line of precision weapons because a memo tells you to do it. Expanding this capacity requires a total industrial base redesign, from the sourcing of raw materials to the certification of new manufacturing facilities. That process takes years, not weeks. Consider what a Patriot missile battery actually is in practice. It is not just a launcher sitting in the desert. It is a highly networked system requiring sophisticated phased array radar, a specialized engagement control station, antenna mask groups, and highly trained personnel. When functioning properly, it creates an invisible shield over a designated area. But without the actual interceptor missiles loaded into the canisters, all of that multi-million-dollar technology becomes completely useless. It becomes a very expensive target. When researchers report that up to 70% of these interceptors are gone, they are telling us that the invisible shield is failing. The entire defensive strategy of our forward operating bases relies on the assumption that those canisters are full. When they are not, the entire architecture of base defense collapses, and the production bottleneck is severe. The rocket motors alone require specialized solid propellants that must be mixed, cast, and cured in highly controlled environments. If you try to rush the curing process of a solid rocket motor to meet a 21-day political deadline, you risk creating microfractures in the propellant. That means the missile could explode on the launch pad, killing the very troops it was built to protect. The physics of aerospace engineering do not care about a memo from the Pentagon. While politicians argue over optics, the real cost of this failure is being paid by the men and women deployed in the region. Put yourself in the position of a United States commander currently stationed in the Middle East. You are watching radar screens light up with incoming hostile drones and ballistic missiles. Your primary responsibility is to protect your troops and vital infrastructure. But because Washington has allowed the supply of interceptors to run dangerously low, you are no longer allowed to simply shoot down every incoming threat. You have to hesitate, you have to calculate, you are being forced to decide exactly how many interceptors you can afford to launch. You have to weigh the probability of a drone hitting a populated barracks against the terrifying reality that if you fire your last Patriot missile today, you will have absolutely nothing left to defend against a larger barrage tomorrow. This is not a theoretical wargame. This is the daily reality of a military stretched thin by 5.5 months of continuous high-intensity engagements without a functioning logistical backup plan. We are placing our own service members in direct avoidable danger because our strategic planning failed to account for the mathematical reality of a sustained conflict. This brings us to the most alarming consequence of our depleted stockpiles. Our adversaries can count. The leadership in Iran is monitoring our military readiness very closely, and they clearly recognize that they are currently operating from a position of profound strength. We know this because of how drastically their diplomatic demands have shifted in just the last few weeks. Historically, when Iran issued sweeping demands, they tied them directly to negotiations over their nuclear program. That was the established pattern. But that has changed entirely. The Washington Post is now reporting that Iran has issued an entirely new aggressive set of demands just to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical economic choke points on the entire planet. Roughly 20% of the world's total global oil consumption passes through this specific waterway every single day. If it is closed, the global economy suffers immediate devastating shockwaves, and Iran is now holding that waterway hostage with conditions that would have been unthinkable just 6 months ago. They are demanding the complete lifting of the United States blockade. They are demanding the payment of sweeping war reparations, and they are demanding the immediate release of frozen Iranian assets. Why are they making these massive demands now, entirely separate from any nuclear negotiations? The answer is brutally simple. They know we are running out of the weapons required to stop them. They are fully aware that our stockpiles of advanced interceptors have been severely depleted. They know that the Pentagon is desperately issuing memos to an industrial base that cannot possibly meet the timeline. They recognize that our military options have been drastically reduced because of the sheer expenditure of these precision munitions over the last 5 months. When a nation knows its primary adversary lacks the ammunition to sustain a prolonged engagement, that nation no longer has to negotiate in good faith. It can dictate terms. Iran's demands regarding the Strait of Hormuz are not the actions of a government feeling the pressure of American leverage. They are the actions of a government that believes the United States is entirely boxed in. They are daring the United States to stop them, knowing full well that our military commanders are counting their remaining interceptors one by one. This brings us to the bizarre disconnect between the situation on the ground and the statements coming from the highest levels of our own government. Over the weekend, the president sat down for an interview and offered a deeply confusing assessment of the crisis. He stated that the United States is currently, quote, low-keying it with Iran. He also claimed that we are, quote, semi-negotiating with them. What does it actually mean to semi-negotiate with a hostile power that is effectively holding the global oil supply hostage? What does it mean to low-key a crisis where your regional commanders are actively rationing the interceptors keeping American soldiers alive? It sounds less like a deliberate diplomatic strategy and more like a desperate attempt to stall for time. Noticeably absent from the president's recent remarks was his usual threat to attack Iran. For a leader who frequently relies on aggressive rhetoric and threats of overwhelming force, this sudden shift to low-keying it is highly revealing. It strongly suggests that the administration knows the military option is severely compromised, even if they refuse to admit it publicly. The confusion only deepened when the vice president spoke about the situation. Trying to project calm, the vice president told the public that we are, quote, in the middle of the game here. He emphasized that the administration is applying a whole host of diplomatic, economic, and military tools to secure the best outcome, insisting he feels quite confident we will get there. But treating this like the middle of a game ignores the catastrophic realities of the last 5.5 months. It feels much more like taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. If we are truly in the middle of this process, how is it possible that our strategic position is vastly worse today than when this began? Using diplomatic and economic tools now, after the military deterrent has been effectively exhausted, is a fundamentally backward strategy. Many defense analysts and retired military leaders have pointed out that those economic and diplomatic levers should have been the primary tools from the very beginning. Instead, we relied entirely on precision military hardware. We burned through our safety net, and now that the magazines are running dry, the administration is suddenly talking about a whole of government approach. There is a very clear and dangerous reason why the administration's public statements differ so radically from the frantic memos being sent behind closed doors. What officials say publicly has immediate political and economic ramifications. Acknowledging that the United States military is experiencing a severe shortage of critical interceptors would likely cause panic in the markets, especially with the Strait of Hormuz already under threat. It would also carry a heavy political cost domestically, dismantling the image of unquestioned military supremacy. But pretending the problem does not exist is actively making it worse. You cannot solve a deep structural failure in the defense industrial base while simultaneously insisting to the public that everything is fine. You cannot modernize and expand missile production facilities when the commander-in-chief is threatening to prosecute anyone who tells the truth about the shortages. This gap between the public narrative and the documented reality is leaving our military exposed. The choice to threaten whistleblowers on social media rather than address the root cause of the crisis is perhaps the most disturbing element of this entire situation. Using the word treason to describe individuals who are raising the alarm about depleted military stockpiles creates a profoundly dangerous environment within the defense establishment. It sends a chilling directive to every military officer and intelligence analyst in the Pentagon. The message is clear: if you report the factual reality that our magazines are empty, you will be publicly targeted, your career will be destroyed, and you will be branded an enemy of the state. When military professionals become terrified to deliver bad news to civilian leadership, the entire system of national defense begins to break down. We have seen this exact dynamic play out in other nations throughout history, where leaders surround themselves with voices that assure them the military is invincible, right up until the moment of collapse. A functioning democracy requires an honest accounting of its vulnerabilities. If the people managing our defense supply chains are more afraid of a social media post than they are of an incoming ballistic missile, we are fundamentally incapable of correcting our course. We have to ask how we arrived at a point where a hostile nation can simply wait us out. The fundamental miscalculation was believing that advanced technology could infinitely replace industrial capacity. For decades, the philosophy in Washington has been to invest in incredibly sophisticated, highly accurate, but extremely expensive weapons. The idea was that precision would mean we needed fewer total weapons. A single Patriot missile could do the job that once required a barrage of conventional fire. That works perfectly in a short, limited engagement, but it fails catastrophically in a grinding, month-after-month war of attrition. Our adversaries figured out the math. They realized that they do not need to build multi-million-dollar interceptors. They only need to build thousands of cheap, disposable drones and unguided rockets. If an adversary fires a $20,000 drone and we are forced to shoot it down with a $3 million Patriot missile, the adversary is winning the economic war every single time the trigger is pulled. And when they do that day after day for 5.5 months, they eventually drain our stockpiles. We did not lose this strategic advantage on the battlefield. We lost it on a spreadsheet. The consequences of this miscalculation extend far beyond the Middle East. The entire architecture of global security relies on the assumption that the United States has the logistical capacity to project power and defend its interests anywhere in the world. But the crisis currently unfolding with our interceptor stockpiles sends a chilling message to every other observing nation. It tells them that the American defense industrial base is brittle. It demonstrates that our supply chains cannot surge to meet unexpected demands. If a regional conflict in the Middle East can deplete our precision munitions by up to 70% in just 5 months, what happens if another crisis erupts simultaneously in the Pacific? What happens if our forces are required to defend multiple fronts at the exact same time? The inability to rapidly replace these weapons is not just a logistical headache for the Pentagon, it is a strategic vulnerability that alters the calculus of every allied nation relying on our protection and every hostile nation looking for an opportunity to act. This brings us back to the sheer absurdity of the memo issued by the Deputy Defense Secretary. Giving defense industry leaders 21 days to figure out a faster way to replenish supplies is not leadership. It is bureaucratic panic. It is an attempt to shift the blame for decades of industrial neglect onto the shoulders of the private sector in a matter of weeks. You cannot expedite the curing process of solid rocket fuel by writing a memo. You cannot magically produce specialized microchips because a deadline was imposed. The defense contractors know this. The military commanders rationing their missiles know this, and unfortunately, the Iranian leadership issuing demands over the Strait of Hormuz knows this too. The reality we are facing is the result of years of ignoring the unglamorous necessities of military readiness in favor of short-term political optics. We started this investigation by asking if the president's leverage over Iran is dwindling right along with our weapons supply. The evidence strongly suggests that the answer is yes. The frantic demands for rapid manufacturing, the deeply concerning data from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the abrupt aggressive shift in Iran's diplomatic posturing all point to a severely compromised strategic position. We know that up to 70% of our most crucial air defense interceptors have been expended. We know that replacing them will take years, requiring complex supply chains and specialized components that cannot be rushed. We know that American commanders are currently being forced to make incredibly dangerous calculations about when to defend their troops and when to conserve their final missiles. And we know that instead of organizing a transparent national effort to rebuild this critical infrastructure, the administration has chosen to downplay the crisis, threaten whistleblowers, and offer confusing rhetoric about semi-negotiating. The consequences are already unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz, where an adversary feels confident enough to demand the lifting of blockades and the payment of reparations. This is no longer just a story about military logistics, it is a story about what happens when political denial collides with hard reality, leaving our service members exposed and our global standing diminished. The facts do not change just because they are inconvenient to those in power. If you want to keep seeing deep, evidence-based reporting that cuts through the official narrative, please subscribe to the channel, and thank you for watching.